I was coming from, I wanted to go.
Okay.
to Hotel, I don't know. Restaurant. Forget it. I mean, that's, and I, you know. And I missed that.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone. Before we begin, please, Pamela, you have an announcement.
This meeting is being recorded. If anyone is joining us either in person or on the Zoom call, please feel free to sign up for public comment for the Zoom. Do so via the chat. If you are here, there is a sign up sheet back.
I'll start by just emphasizing some of the key points of the BPL opening statement. The trustees of the library reaffirm our commitment to racial equity and to the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We acknowledge that the library is committed to becoming an anti-racist organization, and that the Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the Indigenous people here. We reaffirm all of this for the context for planning deliberations and public engagement. Thank you very much. Emily.
I'm just going to take your roll call. Sorry, was it short? Going to remove a name here. Feel free to move about yourselves. All right. Thank you. Just one announcement, we do have one member of the committee resigned yesterday due to a lack of her attendance. Her calendar wasn't able to keep up with it, so Carol Crockett resigned from the committee. I think I have the list of names right here. Okay.
Take your time.
Okay. Westbrook,
Present.
Nasso,
Present.
Leonard,
Here.
Saiki,
Here.
Berman,
Here.
Dr. Liu will be late. Jennifer Haas is a new member. She hasn't joined us yet. And I also heard from Ron Dorsey, Cheryl Cronin, and Jonathan Zorth that they're not able to join us today. We do have a quorum.
Jennifer.
Oh, here's Jennifer now.
We're good, right?
Okay.
Roll call with my saying, here she is. Yeah.
And I also wanted to take this opportunity to welcome Jennifer to the committee. Jennifer is an incredible librarian who leads the Rosendale branch and is just a wonderful person. We had the pleasure, some of the trustees, of having a meeting Jennifer in person at her branch. It was inspiring to see what she's managed to accomplish there. So welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. What's that? Oh, great, wonderful. Excellent.
Yeah, this is correct. Dr. Liu was trying to.
Okay, so with that, then I would just ask as an administrative matter if there is a motion to approve the March 28th minutes. So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Objections? No, the minutes are approved. Thank you. So I'll hand it over to the Gensler and Margaret Sullivan team shortly, but I just wanted to say I'm really excited about this meeting. I think we'll see a real sense of where perspectives are trending, what the Gensler Margaret Sullivan team are hearing. It's hard in a process like this sometimes at the early stages to get a sense of where we are and where we're going, but we hope that this meeting will give a sense of the process and what people are hearing, and we'll start to give a bit more architecture around some of the key questions that we'll want to answer here. So with that, I will hand it over to the Gensler and Margaret Sullivan team.
Perfect. Hello, we're happy to be back. We're in a slightly different setup, but don't worry, we're gonna be on our feet in a minute. It's not the gallery.
It's like you're judging us back there.
Yeah. So what have we got for you this morning? So the first piece of the meeting this morning will be a little bit of zooming out a bit, landscape review. We'll have some updates from David on the library, presenting a condensed version of the pre-read that was sent. And then we'll be reporting out a little bit of Boston's landscape and peer institutions landscapes, sort of telling some case stories of libraries that are encountering similar challenges as to what we have been surfacing in the strategic planning work to date. Then we'll be doing a brief update, again, coming back to the strategic planning work. Reporting out on what we've heard from all the workshops we've been engaging in the last month. And then really starting to talk about the framework and where we're headed as far as mission, vision, values, and strategic priorities. And we are hoping to have an interactive discussion around the strategic priorities that are emerging. And then at the end, we'll sort of talk about what's happening next. And before we meet in July, sort of what's will be happening in those interim 2 months. Okay. Lots of ground to cover. I would say this one is a little bit more presentation style, but feel free to stop us as we go along. Most of the discussion we want to have around the mysterious diagram that's in front of you a little bit later in the agenda. So, okay, I think, David, we're starting with you. I have a clicker. I'm happy to click for you.
Great, thanks, thanks, Erin. So good morning, everybody. I just want to start with that a multi-layered acknowledgement. This is incredibly important work, and I just want to acknowledge that we understand that it is a commitment of time, energy, and brain power, and so specific thanks to Christian and Jose for chairing and vice chairing the committee. For our other trustees who are present, Dr. Ray Liu, Priscilla Douglas, our chair, and others who are in and out. Joe Berman is here wearing 3 hats, as I always like to say. Certainly as a trustee, representing special collections and also with the connection to the associates. The staff who are helping lead this with various roles, I think without all of your work, this wouldn't be happening either. Michael, Sarah, Lisa, now Jennifer is joining us to give us some additional perspective directly from the front lines. And our partner, not partner in crime, but partner in fundraising, Paula Seki. So
No crimes are committed.
It's Pamela who keeps all of the on record and pieces. So thank you to everybody, and especially to those who are not actually here yet or are able to join us today too. This is incredibly momentous at this time. I know it's an iterative process, and certainly from my experience, there's always a little trust the process notion that happens, and we often want things to move faster than they actually can. But just watching, guiding, interacting, I think we're continue to head in the very good direction, and I think we're at this pivotal midpoint where that messy middle starts to become slightly less messy, and then gets us to the place where I hope we will have strong guiding vision, mission, principles, values, priorities for the next 3, 5, 10 years. Who knows, right? We'll see what comes out of that. So I was asked to set the stage a little bit in terms of the library today and how we generally talk about what we're about today. Because although our strategic planning work is very much future oriented, we have to know where we're starting from in order to know where we're hopefully going. Some of this is not static, but it is oriented towards future work. So they are work in progress thoughts. But so this is actually a version of a presentation I would give to the public. I've also given to new trustees. And so I thought we would just do that. First slide, please, Erin. So the operating mission statement, as we've discovered in previous meetings, there are actually maybe 2 or 3 versions of this floating around in different documents, but this is the one that we refer to as a leadership team, and the one I try to lead with more explicitly. I can't promise you it's 100% in all of the places it should be in our documentation, but we provide educational and cultural enrichment, free to all, for the residents of Boston, Massachusetts, and beyond, through collections, services, programs, and spaces. So it's the character of what we do. It is to whom we do it or with, and how we do it through specific assets that we have here. Next slide, please. Organizationally, we do have a dual identity. And this sometimes gets in the way of decision-making. It sometimes enables creative decision-making. So within the city of Boston, we are a city department. I work for both the mayor and for Priscilla, and so that really is where our org chart goes. But within the Human Services Cabinet, which is where we are located under Mayor Wu's organization of city government, we are there, and we are partnered with the other departments: Boston Centers for Youth and Family, Office of Veterans Affairs, Age Strong Commission, Office of Youth Engagement and Advancement, Office of Returning Citizens. Many of the departments that are in a critical way providing direct service to patrons where they are at all ages. Next slide, please.
David, if I could just, for the record, Ms. Brooks is, joining me.
Welcome.
You just missed me thanking everybody, so thank you for. And then the other half of our identity is our trustees, many of whom are around this table. I'm all smiling in these charts. So just to acknowledge that that is our reality. And in statute, the trustees are charged with care and oversight of the operation of the library. Next slide, please. A little more abstract in terms of our focus. I think it's important to situate the library within an analysis of social sectors, socio-political, economic sectors, and there are three that we exist at the intersection of. We are these, and we interact with them. We are an education and learning organization. We are an arts and culture organization, and we are a human and civic services organization. I think part of the challenge of our work is to prioritize and how to understand how these interact and guide who we are and how we show up for the lives of our residents and beyond. And the four strategy areas, the four pillars of service, which builds on the earlier concept in our mission statement, calls out collections, of which there are 20 million plus, 23 million, depending on how you count. There's a slide of breaking that out in a moment. The physical spaces and programs. So the spaces are 26 public service locations across the city, 25 branches today. And of course, the central library that serves as the headquarters, the incredible place to visit, and also a branch for the Back Bay neighborhood. So, and it is programs in some ways that make those spaces come to life. The third bullet is really the reference to our staff capacity who provide services and perform outreach, whether outreach is service outside the walls of the library or it is a more marketing styled outreach to community. The fourth is that duty to cultural heritage, preservation, digitization, and activation. And you could locate, for example, our new emerging community history department in this area as a new way of not just going with traditional historical storytelling, but listening to the stories of today's community and their experiences. This is based on William Vegan's work on school libraries and public libraries, their history, as well as populated with some of Eric Kleinenberg's work on civic infrastructure. And then just to note, how are we doing? Well, as of December of 2023, we were at 99% of our reach statistics. Lisa and I will go into the 23, 24 numbers at some point, but given the pace of things, we are in aggregate back to, if not exceeding, pre-pandemic levels. Not exactly back in exactly the same way as before, but nonetheless, from a reach point of view, we are strong, we are well used, and we are loved as a foundation for the work ahead. Next slide, please. One very important lever of who we are and what we do is our budget. This is the summary budget that goes in the budget book. We actually think there's probably a better way to tell this story, but nonetheless, you will see a slight imbalance or a slight, it's quite clear where the majority of our funding comes from, with $48 million in FY '24 out of a $58 million total budget. So 80% of our funding really coming from the city of Boston. The affiliates number is, this is number spent and not necessarily raised. That is includes our principal fundraising partner, the Boston Public Library Fund, as well as money coming from the associates primarily. We're going to try and clean these up for a later presentation, but just as a placeholder. And then from the state, I think we have state aid, and those two lines actually get combined, the next two. So that's about $6 million in state funding. Which used to be, by the way, that used to be up in the $10 to $20 million range. We lost that over the years.
David, those of us before I say, under the state, what is that?
ILL and LFC, yes, my apology for the extra acronym. So this is a state line that is specific to interlibrary loan and the Library for the Commonwealth program, which is restricted to those program areas,
Right.
whereas state aid, the previous line, is more general operating funds.
Okay.
Our trust fund revenue is from the portfolio that we manage, you manage as trustees. And about 80% of that, by the way, is restricted to specific programs and grants and opportunities. It's not money that we can direct to other areas, which is why the private fundraising is so important, because as much of it can be as unrestricted as possible is great. And then the last bucket is our enterprise revenue from rentals here and other sources as well. So, we could do a whole session on budget possibility, and Aaron and Maureen and others, that probably feels like an implementation conversation, which I think happens in September, October of this year, if I'm right. Next slide, please.
Can I?
So, yes.
Which is that the trust funds is proceeds from an endowment. And
Yeah, we have about, as of the flash report from last week, it's about $71 million in valuation. It is invested through the city's mechanisms and accounts, but managed by the trustee finance and audit committee from a policy and director point of view. We have a spendable 5-year average policy that generates that in FY '24.
Thank you.
And so the fact that both there are such significant drops under trust funds and other. One of the top one reflects the market trust funds, or this reflects the 5-year rolling average?
Yes, and what you can tell from this sheet is that for FY '24, it's the budgeted amount that we're showing here, whereas for FY '22 and FY '3, it's the actual spent amount, which when we have more funds available, we sometimes will go over. So when we close the FY '24 books, those two numbers will actually go up, as will the amount in the affiliates, I think, because of Paula and others' great fundraising activities.
So other, for example, that's events.
Events
I'm
primarily.
just surprised to see it peak in 2022, and then we go into just.
I believe that's there's some timing, fiscal year timing issue around that when revenue was recognized. But I can get you that detail.
Just wondering where, I mean, I'm not a board member, but where you should be alarmed.
Right, so we are actually seeing increase in the indirect revenue from events revenue. So there's an anomaly in this chart that's not transparent in this level.
It's helpful to have the data though, because it just underscores the degree which the city really does provide the both library support, and it further supports and underscores the importance of being mindful of the mayor's vision for the city and the library, which we'll talk about.
And to consider other models too, like, so for example, New York or other libraries who have a very different funding model.
Good point.
And what happens when commercial real estate tanks in the next few years and the city might not be able to be so generous?
Indeed. Next slide, please. And then just a quick scan of our collections. And this is important because just to tell the difference between what is circulating, what is research, and what is special collections. we obviously spend a lot of time paying attention to what people borrow every day from the library. That's about a 1.8 million collection number spread across central and branches. The special collections that gain a lot of our intellectual attention in many ways because they're the most interesting, valuable and rare materials. That's 3.5 million. But honestly, it's the research collection at 16 million that is the largest amount of our holdings. It includes some not terribly interesting documents, but nonetheless, as a federal depository, we are required to maintain quite a large number of government documents. But there are as many undiscovered gems and stories within the research collections as there are in special collections. And sometimes this is just an arbitrary distinction. Again, through an anonymous foundation's gift that came in primarily through the fund, we have a project to rediscover the founding research collection, the very first components of the research collection of the Boston Public Library within that number. So there are many, discovery journeys, choose your own adventure for the library stories within these holdings. Maps you will see as listed here within special. And indeed, we will have the next exhibition from the Leventhal Map Center opening this evening. So just a note. Oh, sorry. And last slide, please. The capital budget is another aspect of our reality and care, not just care for our buildings, but transformation and renovation power for our buildings. It has been an incredible privilege and opportunity over the last 7 to 10 years, and that hopefully continues over the next 7 to 10. Heidi's point about real estate notwithstanding, but this current upcoming fiscal year, the mayor and the city have released a proposed budget, which to the library represents $242 million in capital commitments over the next 5 years. That is unprecedented. I believe it's fair to say no library administration has ever had the opportunity to renovate as many branches and spaces as we have done. And Rossendale being one of the more recent places. And, as we heard when we visited, every time we renovate, usage goes up, visitors goes up, circulation goes up, communities are happy. Staff are happy until they're exhausted, and then it's just a dynamic we have to go through. And so we know that that little phrase of if you build it, they will come. If you renovate it, they will come. That turned out to be true in all cases. Buried at the bottom of this slide is a really, really important number and commitment. So in this year's 5-year capital plan, the mayor has committed a $50 million number to the transformation of this McKim building that we're sitting in here today. And that is a game changer that allows us in theory and ultimately in reality to be able to then go to our state colleagues, our private philanthropy colleagues, maybe the federal government, if it's still functioning, and ask for similar commitments at that level. Because we know from the 2021 study, the cost of transforming and renovating and preserving the parts of this building that need attention is on the order of $300 to $400 million if we were to do everything that we wanted to do. There's probably a Volkswagen version of that plan that's slightly cheaper, but this is the door opener to those conversations. That money doesn't become available probably until year 4 or year 5 best, so it's not like we could start writing checks tomorrow, but it signals the commitment. It is from the mayor a commitment to the library, what we're about, where we're going, and this incredible building as part of as a jewel in the city of Boston. So expend hours on that too. But I do think what we want to do and how we want to transform that should be in dialogue with the strategic planning mission value principles and vice versa. Thank you. I think that's my slightly longer, quick.
We stuck in there as just a talking point. We sent through the mayor's state of the city address. So it was just.
Yeah, I would just reference in this context that the main theme continues, and it's now starting to show up in guiding documents from the city, is thinking of Boston as a home for everybody. The mayor talks about growing up and her reference to the Chinese character for home and how significant that is. And it's a broad definition of home. It spans both the building, but also the notion of family and connection and space and life that occurs within the concept of home. And so she's challenging all of the city departments to think about how we fit into that concept as we work on whether it's strategic planning or on our initiatives and priorities. In some ways, you know, if we take this notion of first space, second space, third space, first space being actual home, second space being work or school, third space being the place that maybe feels like home or work, but is somewhere else, like a library or a park or another space. You know, that is in reality a lens that works with this concept. So library as third home for all of our residents may be a way to think about that as well. There are initiatives and priorities that she certainly talked about in her State of the City address, but I don't want to take up more time in today's agenda. Erin?
And the other piece, David, when you talked about the mayor's commitment, not just the 50 million, but also talk about the increase in our overall 1.7, is it?
Yeah, so we're in the operating budget, we're seeing about a 1.4% increase in our operating budget. You know, this is the third year in a row where we have seen increases. The first 2 years were about additional staff, probably in total close to 20 additional positions spread across the system, which is that's how we grow. That's how we do more. That's how we expand hours on Saturdays. And then in this coming year's proposed budget, there's been some truing up behind the scenes, but it is allowing us to also not just execute our maintenance budget, i.e. be able to do everything next year we did this year, but some repairs to buildings, investment in technology, and some minor reorganizations that will allow us to continue to move forward. So yeah, even in this economic climate, we are seeing that. The overall city budget, I think, is growing by about 6 to 8%. Some of that is artificial because we're absorbing the planning department from the BPDA. So a 1.4% growth number is actually really good. And not all departments are at that level. Many were actually flat.
Understanding the desire to diversify away from the city funding, right? I guess, what are the factors that sort of lead to success in increasing funding? And the reason where I'm going with this is it seems more about a how to implement strategy rather than strategy itself, but it dovetails, right? And so partly you're trying to think through your strategy and trying to understand, okay, what are things that would increase sort of bigger impacts for the city who wants to sees a return on the investment?
We do have a standing agreement with the city that to the extent that we raise additional funds outside of city or state, those will not be decreased on the city or state level. So I think that's an important message for private philanthropy. So for every dollar that Paula raises or the associates or the MAP Center could bring in, that's not going to represent a decrease in city or state funding. That's in writing. That's done. So my goal has always been push as hard as we can on city and state funding. We don't want to lose anything there, and we would actually like them to grow too. And then in the context of the conversation for private philanthropy, Paula, you probably will want to enter this in a second, but I think it is, you know, the mixture of, you know, our previous CFO used to talk about, well, the city covers buildings, bodies, and books, but everything else that brings the library work to life comes from these other sources. So incredible programming opportunities, managing the Lowell Foundation's annual gift to the library that facilitates some of our programming. The community history department that is still in innovation and experiment, which came from in part a Bank of America $500,000 grant and some other opportunities as well. So I think it's really about where is the growth in corporate philanthropy, which is challenged right now? Where is the growth in foundation-driven philanthropy, both locally, regionally, and nationally? And where is the opportunity on just individuals who have such a great love
That's-
to?
That's the highest. So when you look at giving, 70% of the growth will come from individuals. Institutional funding changes, priorities change, for institutions, whether it's a foundation or a corporation, but we've developed a sort of sustainable model where we are raising money for some of the innovative positions, whether it's an entrepreneur in residence, chef in residence, ESOL instructors, career counselors. And over time, the data has been able to allow Michael and David to go to the city and say, see what social work, for example, social worker, see what's happening here in the need, let's transition it. So it's been a nice way to approach philanthropists in terms of, here, give us 3 years of funding, we'll have a proof of concept model, and then hopefully we can sustain that with city funds. Yeah, I need to interrupt, but if I could ask that everyone's, the microphones are in the middle of the tables, and you all speak a little behind there, so that we can get it on this one.
Yeah, I would also just add, I think it is a good question, Ray, and I think Paula had some great comments, but part of increasing private philanthropy will likely depend on getting people really excited about what we're doing.
Exactly.
And giving people a sense that they can really make a transformative impact. So I think the McKim project is a great example of something that would really excite, I think, foundations and private donors. But we have to think ambitiously about it, and we have to give people something that they're really excited about, because I don't get the sense that we're quite there yet in terms of sparking private philanthropy in the city of Boston.
That's sort of
No,
coming
no.
back to the strategy, right?
Right.
Like, how do you create a strategy that sort of then has the flywheel, right? So that's-
It's prior to 5 years ago, it's the area we were likely the absolute weakest on, because we were not operating as a traditional nonprofit at all. And so I think in terms of the muscles that the funds team have built, and the different program levels for engagement with individual donors, it's just light years ahead of where we were.
But you're right, because we really relaunched the fund in 2019, there was a hiatus. The foundation was created in 1992 in response to a McKim capital project, but it was never really professionalized. And so we lost a lot of time capitalizing on the goodwill of philanthropists in the city and the excitement of the library. So we're playing catch up, so to build a lot of trust and also get people excited. So what we focused on is really trying to build unrestricted giving and restricted giving, but now we're very excited about what are the phases where we can engage philanthropists in not only the McKim, but there's certain steps we need to take before we can even get them excited about McKim. So in terms of restricted giving, so we have strategies and plans in place, which you'll learn more about, but yeah, we function as a development operation within the library. We're only 8 people, so but we have, last year we raised 8 or 9, it was close to 9 million. So we're seeing that traction and that excitement about the work. So, but I think the McKim will be a game changer in terms of getting people really excited about the work of the library.
And an untapped area, when we start to look further, is the Friends Group, activating the Friends Groups. And, when you look around the country and you look at LA and Seattle and Chicago, the Friends Groups really provide a lot of funding to their local library. So they're engaged. I know your Friends Group is.
Yeah, our friends group is very engaged and supportive for funding certain programs. And I know that they're also, our friends group is like hoping to be able to connect other friends groups across the city. So there's more cross-pollination and support and equity among friends groups, because they vary in strength and numbers and initiatives across the city.
I think this has been a very rich discussion. Thank you, David, for presenting, but maybe we should move on in the interest of time.
Thank you, Christian. So we also want to bring to this group, what is the landscape review that's beginning to inform the strategic planning process? So we have spent the last couple months sort of talking to various groups, doing a lot of the qualitative, sort of where do we want to head? What does success look like? Some of those discussions sort of when we met last time as well. But our team is also seeking to pair this with quantitative insights within the city. So I'm going to run through a few City of Boston areas. This is not meant to be a comprehensive deep dive on all of the metrics for the City of Boston, but a few topics that pair well with some of the emerging what we've heard. And then, as mentioned at the opener, Margaret is going to speak to peer institutions that are also discussing similar topics and how that's been implemented. So I've got a couple slides talking just about Boston, and then I'll hand over to Margaret to talk about libraries. So a lot of this probably won't be a surprise to anyone in this room. We will share the slides. It's a little small on the page. But in the what makes Boston unique, what are we doing well as a city, big picture, what are Boston's strengths and sort of uniquenesses within the country? Boston as a whole is growing at a similar rate to the United States as a whole. It's about 8.5% average annual growth per year. It is a higher median household income. Again, we're talking within the footprint of Boston than the US average. And then interestingly, and again, this will not be a surprise to those in the room as Boston people, a much higher percentage of foreign-born residences than the US average. The Boston population is 14% higher than the US average for foreign-born population. And in particular, this diversity index, so the 80.3, we're looking at the walksheds of the library. 80.3 means if in any pairing of two people within the city, the chances of those two people coming from different backgrounds is 80% within the city of Boston, which again is higher than typical. And I would also say as a hidden foreign-born resident, that's definitely been my experience. But thinking in Boston and who we're serving, understanding that uniqueness, especially when we're talking about the communities that we're focused on.
Can I just add one comment? So just on the population number, despite all the challenges, Boston is still on track to be at between 750 and 800,000 by 2030.
Correct.
So despite all of the housing challenges, kind of absurd, but yes.
But that number is lower than it's been historically, right? I mean, has the population declined over
No,
time or not?
not in Boston. That has had points.
We lost a Congress in 2010, right?
There's a high point in the fifties, I think, where it was like
Yeah.
100, then it went down for quite some time and it's been on upswing.
Yeah, it was mid-century, mid-20th century was higher.
Sure.
But in general, last few years, it's been tracking similar.
Can you just read the small print under the bolds? Because I can't see. It says 693 plus.
Which is about 8.5% average annual growth since 2010, which again is comparable to the US. 86K median household is 13% higher than the US average. And the 20% of foreign-born residences is 14%.
14% or 14 percentage points.
14 percentage points higher.
That's just interesting. Yesterday I was talking with someone in the mayor's office. It's not just that 27% are foreign born. Within that 20%, 27%, it's incredibly diverse compared to other cities. So 60% of that group comes from 10 countries. In almost every other city, sort of 60% comes from one or two different countries.
As we've been doing some deep dives into the Boston landscape, that Boston is a differentiation in its immigrant patterns than the rest of the countries.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
And the implications of that is that people who are foreign born have a pattern of going to the library. They come here with that pattern and an appreciation of libraries.
And they come to learn the English language.
Excuse me, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, this is a smattering of stats. There's definitely more areas we could go to. The other one that's of particular interest for our work is the understanding of what is the catchment area of the libraries, and for the city of Boston, sort of are those catchment areas overlapping well with where the population is living? So the colors that you're seeing on the map, darker blue is more people living in that area. And the outlines, again, these are a little hard to see. So these are our libraries. The outlines are a 15-minute walk shed from each library. There's a lot of overlapped walk sheds in the middle of Boston. But in general, the good news in this one is the majority of the population, including many of the areas with high population numbers, are actually really well captured within the watershed, sort of reach out radiuses of the branches themselves. I think there, there's a little bit of a gap in the Seaport area, and maybe it's a 20-minute walk for East Boston, but in general, what we're seeing is that the reach of the current system compared to where people live in Boston is very well paired, which gives us a lot of opportunities to have impact for those populations. I think the stat on the bottom here is 73% of Bostonians reside within the existing library footprint watersheds. Okay.
This is really good data.
Well, this one you're not gonna like as much.
Consistent with other cities.
No, we have a much higher density of
Much higher.
physical branches to population and
And a
geography.
good overlap.
Yeah.
Very few populations that are missed by your
Yeah.
sort of reaching out arms.
Like when people understand the size of our city, they go, you have how many branches?
Yeah.
I mean, there's really good reasons for it and they're all loved by their local communities, but it's, one would not design it this way.
And that just say the implication or tying back to the mayor's vision, the key is what she's creating is these neighborhoods so that people have access to arts and culture and healthcare and a community garden and a community playground. All of that is part of that plan, and the library plays a key role in the vitalization of these particular areas. So the identity of our branches in each of these, in identity engagement in each of these branches is really a big opportunity for us.
Okay, so the next one comes with a couple caveats. I would say as our team, we are just beginning to start to review data at a branch by branch level. This is a little bit of a teaser. We're looking at utilization, sort of how many people are coming in the door, visitor programs, circulation, and other data points that we are gathering in partnership with the BPL team to analyze sort of what's the unique needs and how do they pair with some of the opportunities. I'll explain the diagram. Again, this is a snapshot of just one comparison of how many people are coming in the door versus the population within that 15-minute walk shed. It doesn't necessarily give us a full finding without other nuance around sort of what are they doing when they come in, what are the program numbers. But in general, this blast radius for Central is a signal that it is capturing a higher population of its 15-minute walk shed. Again, self-explanatory, we all know this. Than the population within the 15-minute area. Whether that is good or bad is the nuance that I'm saying this one diagram lacks. But it is interesting kind of looking at what are the top 5 that are almost punching above their weight. They're bringing in a much higher population than the population directly within their footprint. And then some of the others, the caveat that I want to make is a small dot is not necessarily a bad thing. It may be a population that is smaller than some of these areas, but it's just one data point that we're starting to explore. But our team still needs to layer on what are the programs, what are the people, what are the populations. So again, this is a snapshot, but not necessarily saying this is good or bad.
Yeah, and I do want to give like a caveat here, because this is just relative to each library and only about physical visits in a year that we're still on the upswing. But I will say the fact that your central library is so active and vibrant is actually an anomaly in urban libraries and something to be very proud of. I think this, as David knows, urban libraries are seeing decreases in their attendance.
And we are one of the top 10 in terms of visitor destinations as well.
Yeah.
So that's one of the anchors that we need to look at in terms of who's actually here and utilizing the space.
It really are quite interesting. So I think what it's saying is that the dots are just relative use.
1,000 people.
So even though the Back Bay has a lot of people in it, that's not the reason why the circle is big.
It's also like people,
because there are a lot of people report to the neighborhood that are using it.
Correct.
It's people from all over the city and tourists, and we have no way to factor that out of.
Fair enough, that's a good distinction. It's not just, that is a good distinction.
And those layers of nuance, adding additional data to that will tell a more complete story, but we wanted to give a preview of some of the things we're saying.
How are you collecting this data? I mean, because it's not like You know, again, how are you collecting the data?
Yes,
We have cameras to count the people that come in.
People counters.
If people counters that come in.
Okay.
But it's, it's not his point, but it's a big plus. There's more of an apples to apples comparison among the branch libraries, right?
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I would layer on the socioeconomic factors as well, because that's a big piece here when you look at the branches that are represented aside from that.
I can't hear you.
I would layer the socioeconomic factors here, because if you look at the branches that we see here with the highest usage, they're in much more affluent sections of the city. So how do you take that into consideration? Except for Mattapan, I would take.
I mean, yeah, because there's a quantitative slice, there's a much more I mean, I would do this for all of our reach data, so we can actually compare strengths and weaknesses. In some ways, it's not all about visitor counts. It's important and it shows opportunity and it's a measure of engagement with the local communities. So it's accurate from that point of view, but there's more narrative here that we should unpack. And, you know, we do know that, you know, Parker Hill is very challenged around visits. We also know that Rosendale, JP, West End, West Roxbury tend to skew high on circulation, but is that high because it's a smaller number of people borrowing more books, or is it more people borrowing a smaller number of books?
And
So-
some of the other data points that we're starting to play is, and what are the programs that are offering the for people in, what is the circulation versus visitation, and also, what are populations it's serving. So, I have two of these and then I'm handing to Margaret, but again, there's a lot of different nuance to the populations versus how that reflects in the data as far as visitation or how the library is being used. I don't think I need to explain that this is a red line map overlaid with our 15-minute cities. But what's interesting of it is that looking at, we know that the formerly mainly declassified parts of the city are continually underserved populations. This is a historical need, and how does that, understanding that these underserved populations are all within our 15-minute walk shed, how do we ensure that we are reaching out to those populations and including that as part of the nuance? Do you want to layer onto that as well, Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this map closely and you look at the data of usage, it all starts to relate to each other. And this really informs an equity agenda for the library moving forward. So it's a great resource that's historically sets that context from a historical standpoint.
And the colors, just because again, some of the labels are a little small on the screen. The dark green areas are the non-red lines. The red is the red line, but we know this correlates with home ownership rates, educational attainment, and ongoing poverty rates within these areas.
And I think the library has a real opportunity to reverse systemic challenges. And I went to a gala a few years ago and a politician, Michael Blake, said the same dollar that's, the same Park Avenue in Manhattan is the same Park Avenue in the Bronx. And I was like, the relative for that for public libraries is the same dollar we spend in one neighborhood, it's the same dollar we spend in another. So it gives us that power to reverse some of these systemic harms.
I just want to mention the tourism again, and the idea of destination. So one of the things, if will be, as we go forward, think about what is a library that has the Irish collection?
South Boston has one, and here also.
Yeah, huge. But when we did the bike around, we stopped by there. That is a destination for people that if we were tied into Meet Boston, when people come here, they can go to the library. In Roxbury, Mattapan, and Grove Hall, those are destinations for Black and brown people to come and to see a specific collection. So that's one way. If people don't have a traditional pattern of going to the library, to have it as a programming hook for them to go to the library and to feel welcome in there. This is your place.
And then the last map, I'll make you endure this morning, there are definitely more here yet. Overlays of maps, coming back to that unique sort of foreign-born population as well. So the prior map is a little bit more the historical and generational populations of Boston. This is more the foreign-born populations of Boston. Similar to the blue one, a darker color indicates a greater population of foreign-born. And to the point made earlier, there is a lot of diversity within that foreign-born population of where they are coming from and where in the city that they're hitting. But what's interesting about this one is mainly, we know we have a higher population, but as we're looking at the catchments, how are we engaging with those groups and tailoring programs to those needs as well?
Do we have the ability to do an economic class slice on this? Because people who are staying, who came after college is a very different population than, I don't know, the latest large groups of refugees that we're seeing from Haiti and other places. Those needs are very different.
I know we have some of the maps that are by sort of where they're coming from, sort of by country of origin as well, so we can overlay that.
Yeah, the data that we will continue to collect from you can come from questions you'll need us to answer to, so.
I think it's, sorry, you go first. Listen.
Is there a way also, when you did the red line, is there also a way for us to parcel out homeowners vis-a-vis renters?
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus renters, a lot of this is, there's a few different sources, but one of the primary sources is census data, so I can definitely ask it.
And I've been saying, go into Beacon Allen, Boston indicators. The Community Foundation's data metrics.
We can connect you to the BPDA policy team as well, who has the actual underlying data, which is, because that's what TBI works from, so.
I also
Get you to the source.
One of the things that I thought the data were really interesting. Another metric that we might look for is just the number of people that go through various neighborhoods. Are there any places in the city that we're not touching that we should? Two ideas that come to me are the airport, and that may just be whimsical, but there are so many people that come through the airport that have so much spare time. If the goal is to boost the brand of the library and get people more interested and provide people with resources, that might be a place. The seaport is another idea. Like, that's not a place that as many people live, but it attracts a lot of tourists. And again, if our goal is to get in front of as many people as possible, as many potential donors as possible, that might be other.
I feel like a lot of people are moving to the seaport. I mean,
Yeah.
the seaport
Yeah.
is, yeah,
City in the south.
yeah.
As we think about target audiences, I think we have probably multiple lenses to think about. The profile raising donor attraction strategy is one. From a service impact, I actually want to see this turned on its head in 5 to 10 years, where the places where we're actually seeing the largest amount of traffic should be the most economically challenged neighborhoods of our communities in the city.
Right.
It should be the opposite, actually, from a social impact point of view.
Those are the people that, for whatever reason, are not coming to the library. So Lisa, you always say, how do we get to the people, that aren't coming, right?
Yeah, the people who need us the most are actually the hardest to reach.
Yeah,
But I want to say, Hannah's a really good example.
Mattapan is a great example. Yeah. Yeah.
It does not have high circulation, very high use and capital use was pretty high.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, understanding
We need to
what.
hone in on that.
It's interesting, when I was in banking, Vatican actually has one of the highest rates of ownership in the city. So some of the assumptions we have about a place.
That's interesting.
And I would not say that our goal is, I think we want all of our citizens invested in the libraries. And if you turn everything on its head, libraries are a place of where people go. That's also affects the dynamics there as well. So I think.
It's more equity, right? It's more equity, like you talked about the Friends, how they're very different. So we developed this Catalyst grant to help provide it. I think it's more of the term equity, maybe.
Both things, yes, and the word, both things.
Or social carbons. I mean, that's what the library was intended to be, a commons, a social commons, a place for connection, community, a belonging. So that as we put that.
Sorry, no. Kevin, I just had a moment. That's
Oh.
I wouldn't want to lose the importance of qualitative impact, like on individuals' lives, in aggregate quantitative data analytics.
I think our approach is, it's gotta be a, yes.
Yeah,
It's a blend of both. It's the successful look like one individual's fulfilling, but also having the door.
I was being slightly hyperbolic with the. Yeah.
I am not a politician, but I play on TV. The state of ETL is strong, and I want to, David's share out, I think, reinforces that. Every time I talk to someone, they're like, "Oh, I got married at BTL. My parents got married at BTL." The relationship, the WTVH is amazing and is the envy of everyone in the country. The success of your facilities is an envy. And as Michael knows, youth development has always been, y'all have always led that historically over the past 30 years. So as we're looking at, I thank you, Dr. Liu, for your request the last time we met, what is the landscape? I have become, in our work, more interested in finding out what are libraries doing across the country that's really having an impact, and what are those emerging themes, and what are the conditions that are creating that impact? Because as those of us in the library world know, we love to talk about new toys or shiny new programs, and often we don't go deeper into what's working and what's not working. So this is being presented with some themes. I have about 5 minutes because we've had such a robust conversation. So I'm going to probably do this quick in terms of the overarching themes. And if y'all want to go into some of the case studies that I'm presenting, just halt and we'll kind of help ourselves discipline our own time. But some of the biggest themes that we're seeing is that libraries are taking a more proactive role and less reactive role in really providing educational experiences. We are supporting career and workforce development in more holistic and robust ways. We are taking responsibilities for what we can do best, which is seeing everyone as a person of potential and seeing ourselves as a complex social, emotional learning folks. The championing of inclusive democracy is a debate we're in right now, as David knows from some of the ULC work. We are activating our spaces and collections in innovative and creative new ways. Building community at the neighborhood level is a huge opportunity that we've been speaking to today. We're at an inflection point, I think, with our commitment to DEI and anti-racism.
What does that mean?
I'll go, when we get to that slide, I'll give some examples of that. And then I think we are embracing that, operating with that collective impact collection action model in a more organic and flexible way, because libraries can. And then we're also looking internally to develop those pipelines for growth, particularly to have diverse leaders in an industry that's 80% white and predominantly female. So those are the big overarching themes. As we go through these, I wanted to just kind of speak to some examples of communities that are doing this work well. Baltimore County embraced getting their young people ready for kindergarten in 2 neighborhoods that were not meeting the metrics of kindergarten readiness by creating spaces that were much more interactive learning experiences for the family. And that has shown, and they have seen an increase in the metrics of ready for kindergarten in those neighborhoods. And again, that's working collectively with the school system. I just remember maybe it was 10, 15 years ago that the Columbus Metropolitan Library embraced, we're going to help get our kids ready for get the 3rd grade reading level up to speed. I think the whole industry was like, how in the world are they going to do it? And it's just one foot in front of the other, embracing the partnerships with Ohio State, and they've had success. Joyful learning, library joy is a trend. And there are 2 examples that I just think I love. One is the Calgary Public Library. Educators can submit to be at the library for a week, and they engage in a project-based learning at the library, which I think is so fun. It builds a love of learning in relationship with the library for a lifetime. There's storytelling festivals, how-to festivals are really wonderful, but those intergenerational experiences. that bring families together for joyful learning. Connected learning is an alternative out of school learning experience that your teen space here is also based on, but it's providing that peer relationships, passion-based learning. And then it started with teen learning at the Chicago Public Library. But as we know, all teens want to make stuff. They want to do fashion shows. They want to make music. They want to make movies. They get into robotics. So Cloud 901 in Memphis has been a real success story for that. And just in 5 years, they've got people making so much music. They have their own record label. They're sending young people who didn't even know there was a Mississippi River in town over to Japan for exchange. They're winning robotics competitions, movies. But we're also seeing, like you see at the bottom, that this kind of arrangement, telling all of its forms, is not just for young people, that we're bringing families together to make, and that's a huge differentiator for public libraries. So getting folks into passion project-based learning. So that leads the pathway into passion-based career development that you're seeing libraries engage in. So actually this bottom image is an initiative that came out of Prince George's County's strategic plan, where they had a strategic pillar, personal achievement. And so out of that came a series of commons that is bringing workforce development. It's partnering with the workforce development programs in the county. They're bringing maker spaces, and they're bringing all of their resume writing resources and business planning resources together. And in 5 different neighborhoods, each commons has a different theme based on the interest and of that specific community. So that's a system-wide approach, but is uniquely characteristic in the communities. The Ives Innovation Center at the New Haven Free Public Library is a 5,000 square foot renovation that was really about designing innovative entrepreneurial experience for folks that are traditionally left out of the knowledge economy. And one of the best success stories there is that there was a man experiencing homelessness and created such a strong relationship with the librarian that she was able to help him get a job in the utilities industry, was the reference for getting housing. And then he comes every single day and is shoulder to shoulder with an entrepreneur in New Haven to develop that strong relationship and that strong sense of community. So it's all of these stories are really about building community that are supporting this success. Social work in the library, Taylor is y'all's hero, who is y'all's social worker here at BPL. But this is, I think this social work in the library is really a story about how do we create sustainable integrated systems to support the social work needs, because they are expansive. So the first library in the country to really introduce the social work approach was San Francisco Public Library, with what they call a HASA program. So they do have one social worker who coordinates folks that have formerly experienced homelessness to help connect with others that are coming in the library to create that trusted relationship, but also generate impact. I will say, based on our previous strategic work with them, it was identified that they don't have enough of this role, and the strategy helped to support the need for increased HASA, which they put into the budget. So below that is Richland Library's approach to social work. One of the things that when you get into the business of workforce development, you discover that there are all these social and emotional needs that this person has that you as a librarian are not equipped to support. And y'all know this as well. But the Richland Library had one grant that they hired one social worker. It was so successful that, and they were able to show the data for that it became operationalized into their operating budget. And Melanie Huggins, who's the CEO, if she's had a little bit to drink, she'll say they have 24 social workers, but in the morning she'll say they're 16. So they're somewhere in between, but it's a compliment. It has to be a compliment because the skills that they have are not skills that the librarian or the library worker can or should, even from a liability standpoint, that complements.
Is that Richland County, South Carolina?
Yeah, our South Carolina. Oh, yeah. A lot of good stuff happening in South Carolina.
It's one of the most innovative libraries in the country. Largely because of the team, the record there has built. Very impressive.
Yeah, I've had to, it's really hard, and we've done a lot of work there, and I'm from South Carolina, and Melanie and I have known each other for 25 years. And so I've had a hard time because I want to give so many of their good case studies, but I'm like, oh yeah, back to Richland again. So I'm like, I'm gonna have to call it like Brown Library 0 to give it. But I think, you know, this is Vegas has also done some great work around collective impact and collective action. And they actually engaged in a traditional collective impact model with early childhood development and met with about 20 nonprofits weekly to really support the what they call FFN, which are those family, friends, and neighbors childcare providers, which are often not legalized. And so they work with those to give them help them with the permits and visits to the library and just support systems, not just for the youth, but for the owners for successful ownership. One of the interesting aspects of the FFN is to be a legally registered childcare provider, you have to own your home. So they even work with them to help get them home ownership. So I think, you know, one of the questions that we discussed last time we were here is like, what do we really need to do? Now, what do we really do to provide impact? So these are those vehicles to do that. The workforce development is a great story. The federal Nevada One Stop has positioned itself in the libraries. The libraries don't charge them rent, but they share in their programming. And as a result of them being located in the libraries, there's higher retention because the folks that need the service also have families that need, you know, story time, that need team spaces to hang out in, need ESL learning. So it's a great model for that win-win where when they can say, you know, what is our impact? They can also count the impact of the Nevada One Force's data metrics to demonstrate effectiveness.
So is the co-location like what we do at Kirsten?
I think it's very similar, although I don't know if y'all have
We give space for.
It's with the ASA.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the organization down there, the ASA organization that does the, I won't say the name, I can't remember.
EDCO.
Yes, that's it.
Yes.
So they provide financial aid and they provide workforce development. And they work very closely with Christine.
Yeah.
But what we don't do, and I just thought about that, I'm glad you asked that, is we should get their data. Right, and include that as what we don't do that. That's a really good idea.
And you know, it's always hard to do these presentations for folks like y'all because y'all are doing all of this already. And so it's like, yeah, so it's like, how do we take a deeper dive into what's successful and share that more openly and candidly as well, I think. So this is, I mean, I think the conversation on democracy is kind of a sticky wicket in the library industry right now. And there's lots of conversations we can have that we won't today. But it's interesting to see what New York Public did just last week. And I didn't even go, but it's the video is online. Because of their relationship with the Stavros Narcos Foundation, they hosted a civics conversation about what's the role of civics in the public library. So I think I put this here because not only are we fostering civic engagement or democracy in the definition going forward, but we're also in roles of hosting these conversations at a what's our role level. Toledo Lucas County Public Library in Ohio is doing some really courageous work around building engagement that fosters increased voter turnout and really taking that head on and really understanding that as being a state like Ohio, there is a responsibility that they have to elevate the bifurcated dialogue. So they're doing some interesting work.
So just one thing, one of the things you know, this inclusive democracy, most of this action is happening in our churches. So when we look at our libraries, it would be helpful, I think, to take a look at the proximity to the various churches and the engagement that they have of their parishioners. Because I know they're not, I look at Bethel, I say, are they using our library? Are they coming to our library? And they really are not that aware of the library services. And they're having all these conversations in terms of voting and
Yeah, that's,
that,
yeah, I mean, it's,
I think a closer alignment with our churches would be good.
yeah, that's very.
That's right, I was saying that, doing that for years, and it's hard to get that kind. But that's another area.
But now we have Mariama.
You're thinking.
Well, I can see benefits and disadvantages to a closer relationship. I think we need democracy everywhere. So
Yeah, yeah.
I think you just have to be, what is the value proposition to churches to engaging with libraries? And what are the downsides? Like religious participation is down pretty dramatically in the past 30 years. And I think libraries, we want them to be a trusted place on their own. And so I imagine in a place like Ohio or in South Carolina, that you can very easily in a nonpartisan way say, register to vote, this is why it's important to be an active participant in your life. But I think it could be more complicated depending on the partnerships you make. I mean,
I agree, yeah.
I think I think the key in this whole conversation about the democracy is informed citizenship. That's what libraries have always been, is informing literacy in all areas. So I think that's the key. The other point about the churches that I think we've always been trying to think about is many immigrants and many people from other countries, that's where they gather in their church. And that's a great way to reach them.
Yeah, I guess another way to think about it is what if there are neighborhoods where there are other dynamics, so-called third spaces, whether they're churches or organizations, what are they doing to connect with people? How can we market them?
I mean, it's another version of, are we really being free to all? Just because someone has more of an association with a place of worship shouldn't mean they're excluded, and there's an opportunity for partnership there. But I do agree that the broader conversation about what is our role in civic engagement in the city of Boston is one that I would very much welcome. I think, yes, we're often a polling place, right? We're often we're hosting what is it, Dominican elections we're hosting for their national elections and
Tell us more about that. What did you?
I don't have the details on that. I think
What's the price of these, where citizens from our country might look at, so. It is.
so, like some countries that allow residents living abroad to vote in their national elections need a place to go do that. So there's that at the lower hanging fruit level, but informed citizenry. I mean, some of our programming certainly addresses that in large scale when we double down on it. But if the goal becomes about how many of the 695,000 residents are participating somehow in the socio-political life of their communities, whether that's voting in a federal election or standing for local office or being involved with their local neighborhood association, that's kind of the catalytic role that we could play. But it's premised on people already trusting libraries and coming to libraries for some services to engage that. So,
and of course, we're also being dragged into this with all that. So I'm sure you're all aware of the book banning and the right to read issues. That's can't not be involved at all. It's so full.
Y'all reminded me of a data point that I'd like to geek out on that I haven't looked at for y'all, which is the Civic Health Index. And it's like, what are the characteristics includes meeting in the past month, voted, but yeah, that'd be a fun data point. So immigrants.
And just as a time check, I think for case studies, we've probably got about 3 more minutes.
Okay, super. So folks are doing amazing immigrant work. The Hartford Public Library, historically, we all should be visiting it, but they have the American Place program that they've had for at least 30 years.
Oh, they're on.
Amazing work. And now we're renovating their main library and they're really connecting it to workforce, making community living room on success. And then this is just a small project that is super fun, that a friend of mine at LA Public Library oversaw, which is just helping the street vendors. Again, kind of like that FFN network approach in Vegas. It's like, what are all the things you need to be successful? Let us connect all those dots so that you can be a successful street vendor and start your business. So creative collection activations, these are just two examples, but they're all over the place. Y'all have the same. How might we activate our historic and archival collections for contemporary enjoyment? The LGBTQIA+ Center in San Francisco is doing some really amazing work. They've just opened up their collections for popular circulating. This is also in response to some of the censorship issues. Christine, who runs that program, is actively involved in the public programming initiatives, and they just did a full Black queer archival kit for Black History Month that they were training folks to collect their own stories. The Vivian Harsh Research Collection that just got a $2 million Mellon grant. They are, actively requesting folks in the community to tell their stories, to have the real stories told back into the collections as well. So great fun stuff happening there. Space activations are very cool. San Francisco Public Library, out in the front, they have Middle Ground, which is a partnership with Exploratorium, Urban Alchemy, which is a nonprofit that connects historically incarcerated injustice-involved citizens into the community. And they are activating their public spaces that have been also places where drug selling is happening, but activating it for positive creative use. And so really having a huge impact on the vibrancy of downtown. Do Good Columbia, they've been activating their spaces to create these threads where 300 members of the community come together for a 3-day design workshop where they're creating solutions for some of the biggest challenges, including how to create a vibrant waterfront and then how to, what are some solutions around homelessness. So interesting work happening. And then this is speaking to where I think we are as an industry around our embracing of DEI. And two, I think I've mentioned before, the Marin County Free Library in Oak Park are really embracing anti-racism as an active strategic energy. And then there's, again, out of Columbia, South Carolina, but it's a national curriculum that is being shared all over the country. Let's talk about race to train librarians to facilitate these conversations. And then the last but not least is just, this is coming out of Chicago, which has historically led the library in the community work. And I just, I think there are two things and two things only I would encourage if you are a branch librarian, which is to convene your partners. So one of the librarians in Chicago convenes her community-based organizations monthly. And then, and they just share resources. They talk about the issues they're facing. And then during COVID, it went online very quickly, and that neighborhood benefited from those relationships more quickly. And then y'all have these librarians throughout your system too, but this librarian, Roy Kinsey, he's branded himself the Rabrarian. His parents were librarians at Chicago Public Library, and he's really trailblazing. He's doing using rap to bring folks in to tell their stories. And it's not just with teens, but he hosts the senior storytelling cipher sessions where seniors come and tell their stories. And it's just really wonderful community building. Cool stuff are happening, community gardens, community kitchens, everyone's loving that. Wilmington Library is hosting, like this week they had Tiffany Haddish, really bringing folks to the library. The censorship, y'all are seeing how urban libraries are addressing that in Chicago Public Library's Book Sanctuary. And then the big talk of this past year was the Jay-Z exhibit at the at the Brooklyn Public Library, which for all, has pros and cons. We'll debate it forever, but it elevated the stature of the public library as a destination. And
the other BPL.
yes. So anyway, thank you for letting us take you on that tour.
We did You did say that you were thinking about the DEI stuff as being at an inflection point.
I think we're at an inflection. So I think our country is at an inflection point with this work, and I think we're seeing, the brave, courageous work of a place like Marin or Oak Park that is really centralizing it into their strategy. And I think it's, as an industry, and I'm not an expert in this, but we're not seeing the conversation like we saw 2 years ago post-Floyd about our commitment to DEI as an industry. So I think it's a time that we all need to take that courage of how we as organizations want to speak about that, want to build the cultural competencies in organizations. And Marin and Oak Park are embracing it in ways that are examples for all of us. And they're embracing it, but it hasn't been implemented or executed for us to see what that is meaning for them. So they're on the cusp of this work.
Given that our work is forward thinking, then the issue or the question is, what's the next level of conversation? And given what's happening in the world, the conversation to me is around humanity. It's around the United Nations Sustainable Goals. That's another way for people to participate. And we are a global city. We, look at the representation. So, yes, this is anti-racism. There's also, as we move forward, something about pro something.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I thought this was really interesting, Margaret, but it's also a little overwhelming. There's just so much that we can be doing, and we know we're doing so much in terms of programming. And it's almost like looking at a menu at a Greek diner with 1,000 things that you can select from. So, I mean, how should we think about analyzing this? Are there data that you would look at on programming to help us understand what is most impactful or which we should be focusing on or amplifying? How do we think about that? Because maybe we continue to do every single thing that we're currently doing, but it's not obvious to me that that's the right answer.
Well, and thank you for that question. And yeah, I do actually reduce my slides, but often at the last minute, I have 10 more ready for you. But I think the key that I hope that I'm able to present to you all is that each community makes a choice on the basis of the prioritized goals and objectives that they have. And that's where we are for you all. That's why the next step of this work for you all is to really glean some of these data points.
But do you think those 9 menu items that is the list of?
I think it can guide y'all.
They do resonate with me. And I think for us, largely in Michael's area, to identify things that we already do that fall under this, and are they super core? Are they optional? And then facilitate a strategic conversation based on that. As you're right, is it institutional priorities, or is it in some cases branch by branch?
And I think it's very important too, we talk about blocks, and building the strategic plan is to be able to flex, because what's important now in the next 5 years, 3 years, or 2 years might change radically after that. And we're not looking at everything, but still, the pace at which needs change has accelerated so much in the last 10 years.
And to David's point, the arc that this sets up for you all is that human development opportunity. And what I'm very interested in to translate is what are the underlying conditions that make this work successful. So it's really, that these are rooted in real needs in the community, that these are taking on coalitions and strengthen partnerships, and really encouraging the skills and talents of the library worker to also make that match. So they're conditions that are setting up the stage for why when libraries take on some of this work, how they can do it well. And that is what I'm most interested for you all, to what are the conditions that at BPL we can create for success.
For the institutions you listed as having great case studies around activating these, do you have a sense of how many of them chose, this is the thing? I mean, I know it's true for Columbus. That's the outlier, I think, though, where they chose reading, third grade reading level, as they're fully committed to that, passionate paths. So because the backdrop here is we resist things that prevent us from having to give up on trying to be everything to everybody. And that's not a good recipe for success.
So if you take Melanie's approach to this work, it's you can't do everything for everyone. So let's go deep in doing something really well for an identified audience. And when you do that, you actually increase the layers around you of serving all audiences even better. So that has been her approach. But I think the story behind any one of these is what was that approach that prioritized that decision and that commitment. And sometimes it's a very clear directive like that. Sometimes it's a methodology.
Yeah, I think a good example is the workforce career focus on Hartford, because they had the opportunity to partner with the America Works program. And I think, so Bridget made the decision really to focus on that and really transform their life because of that partnership.
You know.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think just building on some of these points, you can see how framing goals in easy to understand way is really important to you. A goal of achieving a third grade reading level for everyone, or a goal of identifying apprenticeship opportunities for teenagers or what have you. But once you set the right goals, just making sure all the programming feeds into those, and you can tie the work that we're doing to the specific goal is helpful. If you're just doing 1,000 things and it's not clear how they fit to an easily understandable goal or objective, it seems to me like it's less impactful.
You know, to me, what I would be looking at is at each of the branches, what's appropriate? What is a unique identity for each branch and our individuals? Is the community engaged versus trying to take the 9 items and use that as a way of looking, because that's kind of like looking at Central, telling the branches versus the branches having a unique specific identity where people are engaged, so that those bubbles that you had would be expanding. And what does that mean? It means that the friends groups are engaged, there's collaborations, there's whatever is appropriate for that to be community. So if it's a Haitian community, and we're already doing a lot of this stuff, then there's unique Haitian programming. In Chinatown, there's unique pieces, but we should be able to tell the story from the branch perspective and the vitalization there. The vibrancy is the word I mean. Vibrancy and vitality of the branches.
I apologize for coming late and having to leave early. It's been this week, but I think we'll get all this by email, like the presentation and stuff like that, so I look forward to.
Just a sidebar question, just like Christian, I found this amazing and also whirlwind. But how do we think about who are the actual peer comparisons that we benchmark against? And I caveat this by saying that, you know, we should be leaders and followers, but there must be 5 or so that we think sort of fit in terms of population size and budget, et cetera.
I mean, I honestly think it depends on the topic area, really. You know, I mean, Michael and I probably don't have exactly the same answers to this question, which is.
There's like San Francisco, DC.
Denver.
There's similar, they're innovative, they're also similarly populated in the number of branches. It's but so many of the library systems are county systems, so they're set up very differently than we are. So it's hard. So we look at those city.
The urban libraries.
Yeah, but urban libraries, even like they'll be like Los Angeles has Los Angeles, but it also has Los Angeles County, or Seattle and King County. So it's really, and they're all part of the same system. So it's hard to compare apples to apples.
And by a different lens, there's New York and BPL are 2 of a kind also. So
different scale.
yes, and they are the inverse of each other also from a funding point of view to the earlier question. So there isn't a simple answer to that question, unfortunately.
We don't keep on going. I guess where my question was really going was how do you distill this into sort of, you know, our peers, right? And understand the priorities and the externalities among sort of the ones that we think peer institutions, but, you know, keep it in that.
I mean, I think San Francisco probably has the best, marketing and outreach team, or one of the best right now. I think Richland actually does have the right model for equity work. I think Toronto actually has the best model for civic engagement. So there's probably 10 to 20 like that, that are the groups that one really wants to take the best of and be all of that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate David's comment about their models. Because we did a wonderful bar chart of like comparing, the urban libraries, that funding, where the funding comes from. And I was like, oh gosh, this will not be the right thing to put in front of you all, because it will be, it's not, the apples to apples are not, to be honest, aren't necessarily useful for us right now. And again, we're at an inflection point as an industry. So I think the approach of what models are out there, not just in library world, but in other nonprofit and philanthropic worlds that can support us.
So Columbus has its own taxing authority, basically, to go to the population directly. In some cases, Chicago's, it's the commissioner is a city commissioner and everything else purely incidental. In certain cases, all of the affiliate and foundation and friends organizations are all under a single entity in some, so there's a lot of, again, individual best practices that we might want to take from that aren't quite what we have, but.
Yeah, and similarly, I think what's worked for us very well that wouldn't work for other institutions is with the fund, we developed this proof of concept model where we get the initial funding to do a new innovative idea that meets our goals. We get it funded through the fund and then do that proof of concept to show the data, like this is something that really need to continue, and then the city will hopefully and often pick it up.
You wanna get us going here?
I would love to. So I switched to the priority slide just as we're beginning to talk about priorities. And we really would like to report out on the emerging priorities and have a discussion around that piece. I am going to go back just to as far as, I'm sorry, one side, what we're hearing. I think for one sec, my computer is syncing. So we're not going to do a deep dive of what we've heard. We'll talk more about sort of where that's headed with this group, but we will share out some key findings. But in general, what has been leading up to the discussion and sort of what we've got on the wall here and what we want to talk about today is we have completed a number of workshops with key stakeholders. We have met with the BPL leaders. We've met with staff. Last week, we did both. We met with the leaders staff in the morning, leaders in the afternoon, and then both of them together last Thursday in a joint workshop. So we're starting to bring those voices together. We met with you a month ago, and then we've also been doing a number of conversations with the fund, the associates, other affiliate groups. And at the end of this session, we'll talk about who's the next tranche of conversations, including the city and other partners. In general, we're just going to do a light touch of this. We'll share out a little bit in the appendix as far as like what are more detailed findings from each of these sessions. But in general, one takeaway just to understand our sources is the staff workshop. We empowered the staff to go out into their communities and do sort of deep interviews with patrons or other individuals that they could recruit. One staff member went to Reddit and said, hey, do you use the library? But have opinions on it, like recruited someone they had never interacted with, and then came in and did conversations and interviews. Most of our session with the staff was reporting back on that and transforming what they heard into what we could do and what our priorities would be. With the leaders, that's more kind of bottom up. With the leaders, we went a little more top down as far as what could our mission and vision be, and workshopping around key topics for those high level goals. And the joint session was sort of bringing those two groups together to co-create on emerging priorities that would feed into those aspects. We want to talk about the emerging opportunities. So all of that, every workshop we have done, I think it's interesting post-pandemic. We use a lot of virtual post-it notes and whiteboarding tools. So we go from physical to virtual notes. These are some screenshots of sort of our group's working boards and sort of an infinite whiteboard of digital post-its, but we're bucketing these up into key topics and priorities. And this is where we were last week. Last week, the buckets and priorities were headed towards these 6 ideas. We are going to talk about the evolved versions of this. But just when we went into the workshops last week, the 6 topics that seemed to be appearing was ideas around being supporting culture, education, creating a place that people can join, maybe supporting businesses or personal development, social and community connections. But as you can see on the right, some initial reactions to that were already, where is books? Where is literacy? What are the focus areas? How do they get balanced amongst different branches? Like it may, Priscilla, to your point earlier, this fingerprint may be different depending on location. What does where should free be up on this top level? And what does all mean in the context of these? So we're not going to stare at this because we're going to see the updated version. But just know that since last week, based on some deep dive discussions with the joint session, we have evolved a lot of these. We're going to present those to you now. And then we want to layer on this group's commentary as far as what's important in these areas. Emerging framework. So as a recap, the strategic plan, well customized to the PPL, will contain these 4 critical items. What is our mission? What do we do? What do we not do? What is our vision? Where are we going? And what are our values? Who are we? What's unique to us? As well as a series of strategic priorities, which is where you get into the meat of it as far as like, how do we implement these goals? We have not written our final vision. We talked a lot about that, and nor should we have. We talked a lot about vision in the workshops last week. Some of the items that were bubbling up on that, and we will share these slides out for the details, but we're hearing a lot of alignment around back to that idea of home, a place of delight, responsive to community needs, creating civic and learning spaces, and a place where you can realize your collective ambitions. A lot of the case stories we showed today are directly linked to some of these items that are bubbling up as far as where should we be in the future. I'm moving through this quickly because we want to have the discussion around the priorities because these are still very basic.
And this is as a result of EPL's contribution to the city. What is the city that we envision because of our specific point of view is how we're framing vision.
Mission, again, is in a similar nascent state. We're hoping to layer on some more conversations in the coming months. But as far as to the question of sort of what do we do, what do we provide, creating engaging and equitable experiences, sharing our history, fostering that inclusive, just and democratic society, meeting people where they are, activating all of the parts of ourselves, being that trusted and reliable source in a world of fractioning information, and serving beyond just the city of Boston. Again, these shouldn't sound new because we talked about a lot of this in our last session, but this is what's bubbling up in the direction of mission.
That's what is our central role? How do we bring value to our communities we serve?
And then values, I'd say this is probably the least developed, but we did want to report out on, obviously Free for All is emerging as sort of the top. We considered making it a larger font on the page when we're speaking to values, but we're also hearing a lot of conversations around access. It's maybe free to all, but is it accessible? Sorry.
Free to all.
For all.
It's a small thing.
Some days it feels.
But it's important.
Let's do some history on that.
Iteration.
Thank you. Welcoming, equitable, and connecting. Again, these 3 are the ones we're going to be diving deeper into in the coming months. But the ones that are really starting to converge are the emerging priorities. So we'll share out those sort of initial topics on the other 3. But the discussion we would like to engage this group on is, again, these emerging priorities came up from all of the conversations we've been having. They were iterated upon in detail last week with the staff and leadership group. But again, we would like to sort of use our remaining time today to really add this perspective, this group's perspective on these directions and reactions. I think I'm handing on to you.
That's right. I think what we're really excited about the strategic priority is that it's a framework, it's a conceptual framework, but it should also be a really actionable tool. So it should help us inform some of the things that are true of the system, of also public housing, but should also be a tool for the branches. And we'll get into a little bit more details of how we see that happening. And we've grappled a lot with this idea of like, how can we not be everything for everybody and how do you help prioritize some of these different aspects? So to run through some of the things that are emerging as what are the things that the Boston Public Library should.
Do you want me to flip her as you do it?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks. And different ways of cutting through this, but if we start with the idea of cultural commons and how do we honor the multiple stories and the multiple cultures and multiple heritages, how does that become a foundational mission of how we're talking about collections and so. The idea of lifelong learning, the lifelong learning partner is the active learning piece. And how do you really bring that into learning, into research, into scholarly explorations and dive into those? Those two both talking about this idea of knowledge, how we disseminate knowledge, that's in the way a little bit about power as well. The next two start talking a little bit about place. And two ways of thinking of the library as place. One, how do you create a space that people feel they belong? What is a welcoming, what is inclusivity, what is safety looks like? In the physicality of that, and what's the role of library as place? And then the flip side of that is, what is the library when it's not only a place, when it's outreach? So how do you invite people in, but how do you go out to people? What does that look like? Is it Dropbox? Do you show up at the airport? And what are the ways that physical and non-physical communication ways that we are really reaching out and meeting people where they are? We've seen different ways of exploring that. So balancing that duality in terms of what the priorities are. Huge importance around how do you bring about fulfillment and agency from the more social piece, from an individual perspective of saying, how do I propel my personal growth? And here we have a lot of entrepreneurship and residence programs, and we have professional development pieces that are more individual, and then also that are more foundational. So you can almost think of like macro hierarchy of needs. How do you target both the top piece around really allowing for fulfillment, and you can learn different pieces, but also learn for those some of those more basic needs to be fulfilled, which is the social advocate piece, around social services and agency. And these have come from a lot of these conversations with folks, we started to layer on, and I'm kind of, so as you start thinking through, is this about power, place, and people? How do we start to kind of organize this? There's still a layer here that's perhaps still a bit nascent around what are the ABCs of the library. And so instead we talk about agency and belonging and curiosity and delight and how, so I think there's still an in progress motion of saying, how do you frame this so that these pieces, while they are independent in some ways, they make a whole and balance that idea that, and that this will look different branch by branch, but it is a mission of Boston Library to deliver fully on all of these as a whole. And you might deliver more on one location, less on the others, but as a whole, that we're delivering on the whole mission. So we'll walk you through the next slides and how we're thinking of the whole thing, and then we'll open it up for some of the conversation.
Can I just say one thing? Because this has been kind of, I've been hearing it a lot at this meeting, and I think there's a really important distinction when we talk about the BPL and the branches. The branches are the BPL.
Yeah.
There isn't a differentiation, but like, and as David mentioned, the central library acts as a branch to many people, and because it has, just like every branch has something unique, the central library, you could argue the special collections are the unique piece or the digitization function. It has some unique things, but really the services we provide are everywhere, we're all providing the same, a blanket that all, and so I like, creating that differentiation, I don't think is helpful for the future.
That's, I think there's,
As far as-
I love your, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I love your thoughts on this, because there's this aspect of what are the things that we're doing as a system, which is includes, when I say about BPL, I don't mean the central.
Right.
It's, what are we doing as a system versus what are we doing as specific locations? And when we're looking at the strategic plan, this is a commitment of the whole system. A certain location may have different priorities in how we're delivering that. So we can.
And I think the model piece is a good conversation because let's say workforce development is one of the priorities. Each branch or each neighborhood you may do it differently, but it's not like the priority doesn't apply
That's right.
to everyone.
That's right. And then I'll be curious on a few next slides and see some opinions. So.
Can I just? Yeah. So, kind of unique. I use the word unique in terms of unique identity relative to the branch, including Central. So when I think of Central, I think of McKim, I think of Abbey, I think of there's a unique identity. When you think about the West End, Or if you think about East Boston's unique identity, the first library, immigrant, like that, there's a unique so it's a messaging around the uniqueness versus the availability of programs. Right.
That's right.
So you say, wow, I want you to go to this library because here's the unique thing that's here for this particular place. So as a draw. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and totally.
I think this language choice points to an ongoing systemic tension in terms of how we all think of ourselves. And I do think there have been, over the last 20 years, different points where neighborhood branches, central library hasn't had a great shared culture around how we're all in this together.
That's very typical in the library world.
So I don't want to ignore, I don't paper over that and whatever the leftover legacy of that is. And there's probably, when we get to implementation, more work to do around that. So we all do feel, even if we're small or big, whatever, or system wide, that it does feel like one thing. But I agree that it shouldn't show up as difference in the overarching principles, even if implemented in account of the uniqueness of the environment.
You're right, that's all, those are strengths.
And these are true, that's right, I think, in agreement. The next sequence of slides just walks through a little bit, just to give you, we're not gonna go point by point, but to say, these came from all these different comments, from all these different sources, and we'll continue to work through this graphically, and just to say, where did this idea of cultural commons come from? How did staff and leadership inform? So
This is the first draft
of just bring
of
these.
the
What
synthesis
these
of last
means.
week.
Yeah, that's right.
Reverse, just a quick question, just the first slide. Were there themes that bubbled up that are deprioritized? That we're
No,
not
I think what we
choosing?
did not put here were things that were more internal to the organization. We need to have more, things that were, we need to have more transparency, how we work together and how we.
Values.
I think some of the facts, I think some of those things that are more changes that will need to happen that are more organizational did not show up here. I think those were the themes that we emerged here are more of the, as we serve communities, these emerged.
I guess my question is more, by definition, priority means that you're making a choice, right? And then it's the whole piece around, strategy is not doing things, and that's appropriate. So are there things that we're making an active choice that were on the table that we sort of are deprioritizing?
I'll answer that a couple ways. In our process right now, that comes later. The trade-off conversation will come during implementation. So we're still working through the big why. What are our strengths and assets and how do we want to galvanize those? But I will say in the conversations that we had, and I'll let folks in the room speak to it, embedded in the conversations were things like we can be a connector to social services, but we are not a provider of them. So embedded in these conversations, there are trade-off moments that are happening that help folks galvanize, that are helping the staff and leadership galvanize around this shared.
Yeah, it's a good question, Maria. I had the same thought, and it sounds like, and I think the team did a really nice job segmenting this, but it sounds like what this really is a summary of all the things that you're hearing from people that are important, and it doesn't reflect a prioritization or a decision that there's certain things we're not going to do at this.
Yes, yes.
Which is fair. I mean, that seems like perfect.
The hard choices come later, right?
Right.
But, and also I think there
Not even
are
like
things that are not as important that didn't emerge because the collective didn't bring them forward. So in a way, the really prioritized things have fallen away already, but.
I mean, I guess.
Maybe you take strategic priorities off there. So, because it really isn't, these are not strategic priorities.
That's why they're emerging. Ultimately, maybe towards the strategic priorities, but they're still just because on the table.
Well, yes, this is important, right? Because I just want to make sure we're not walking through a gating factor already having presupposed choices, right? And so if that's true, and these are not strategic priorities, then your outcome says we're only going to pick, I'm just thinking about 3 or 4 out of these 6. And that's important for us to recognize. Are we at that stage or have we already walked through the door and this is already a choice, an implied choice?
This is the gamut of things which we will continue to refine, to create what those priorities are. That hard choice of saying, we're not gonna prioritize going out. We're not gonna prioritize, that's not.
Okay, great.
We'll walk through a little bit, two different ways that we've seen how you can start to prioritize, given the diversity of populations we're serving. There's some, so we'll walk through that. Maybe we do just run through the next color.
Well, I want to follow up on that because somebody mentioned references earlier and it seems glaring in its absence is any reference to books and literacy. So is there a choice made to not include that?
No, that is a subheading that was very much talked about in terms of how do we include that, and is that part of continuing the lifelong learning? And I think those are the choices. How do you prioritize what you put up here versus how much do you think that's a subheading?
But a decision was made not to make that it's a standalone, a separate frame.
So,
No, I don't think a decision was made.
yeah, and also structurally, the way we structured this exercise is, this row, the exercise is about what I would default calling the strategic what, and this row is about the strategic how. And that strategic how explicitly includes books, reading, joy of, and literacy too. So we did articulate that strategically. This is the culmination of what I would call the strategic what.
I mean, I would think of like, books are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end, or they're an asset to accomplish something. We have a ton of responsibility to care for them and do things, but to what end? Like our entire Prince collection exists as a teaching collection, not as we're not a museum and we're not an archive in those narrow senses.
And the collections are also mentioned, for example, in the cultural commons.
Yeah.
The special collection particularly.
That's-
Just
I
call
think
it.
these are seen as what are the goals of the library?
Okay.
That are
Oh, okay.
enabled by-
If you think of these as sort of the collection of goals we have versus the collection of assets we bring to the world. Right, so it's not programs, books, special collections, it's less about that. It's more around what are the things we're looking through what roles.
And when you say that, these are the roles, those are not prioritized. That's the.
They're not prioritized.
I mean, even if you put, these are. A library cannot exist unless it's doing all of these things, a role. There wouldn't be, I can't think of a library that would not have lifelong learning, try to be welcoming, try to be community, try to be all of these things. That's the role of a library. So in terms of, I can't say anything else about that, but I don't think this is what we prioritize. That's.
Right, so
Yeah.
I think one related question is there anything missing from here that we ought to consider? And I do want to not lose something that Joe said. It's not obvious to me that the idea of showcasing special collections, of showing the treasure of the library and inspiring people is in here. Maybe it is in one of these wedges. Where's that?
Yeah, could be more, I think, and it's a good point, because if you didn't see it, others didn't see it as well. So this is not about, I
I
think,
mean, I think that is an important point.
this idea of inspiring.
I think that goes to the heart of the special collections of showcasing the treasure of the library.
But I'm not talking just special collections, Christian. I'm talking about the circulating
that's fair.
collection, encouraging people to read, encouraging literacy.
I think that is more
When
clear.
people think of a library, one of the first things they
Right.
probably think about is that's where I go to check out a book.
Yeah,
And I think that has to be not a subheading. I mean, that's what people, and we need to encourage reading and encourage literacy.
I guess, yeah, fair enough. I sort of see that in the red wedge, but we could make it more clear that it ties to literacy, I'm sure.
And it's also, we heard very similar comments from the staff as well, and I think as we're iterating on sort of the language around these, to hear that point again from another of our stakeholder groups is a signal of like.
And it should go up, yeah, that's about learning, that's about literacy, so I think.
That it shouldn't be there.
In the broad definition of literacy, language literacy, financial literacy,
Yeah.
technical literacy.
Yeah.
When you think about literacy, we do it all.
I have a different question at this page, but it might be answered.
That's okay.
Some of the, maybe mine and maybe we get to the next and it answers this, but is it really 6 or is it 4? Because I think you could reduce couple, but you lose something by reducing certain things. And
Which ones come to mind as things you do?
And there are two that I'm not sure I know what they mean. They do not pop off the page to me as being clear as to what they are. And those two are cultural commons and social advocate.
David, just
Oh, good, okay.
jump off, sorry, just so I'm clear in the process, right? Because we've all done this in our day jobs, right? And then so typically this is the stage, I just want to make sure that we're at, keeps on going to be a broken record, that you're widening the aperture as much as possible, right? So you're developing sort of the universe of options for priorities. And then sort of, then we come down, double click and say, hey, do we reduce, do we choose? Is that fair enough? That's the spot of that. So I guess then the question becomes, is there a seventh or eighth wedge, right? And just to ask the question, maybe there isn't. Maybe this is the universe of options that we have.
And I think to Priscilla's point too, about these are all the things that make up a library, but we do get to prioritize which of those, and not to say we are no longer going to be cultural commons at all. It's like, but for the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to prioritize the community outreach or whatever.
But let's talk, I think to go back,
Yeah.
and let's talk to David's question first, just around the clarity of those. Cultural commons, it isn't clear, it's this idea that the library is a place that needs to tell everybody's story. It's then whose story are we telling, and how are we celebrating cultural collections, how are we celebrating the heritage, the multiple cultures. And we do that through programming, we do that through collections, we do through our books, we do that through our aspect, but it's the mission of not only literacy, but also holding our story. It's a place that holds our collective stories and has its popular stories. So, and whether that is clearly not communicated in these words, but that was the vision of what that looks to be. You know, and these are like the words, like how do you choose 2 words to tell? So.
And beyond the qualitative aspect of holding the culture for BPL in specific, that's also the unique piece around special collections. How do we celebrate those stories in particular?
And that's at this level of this conceptual framework. It's not a how.
It's not a how, it's a kind of like, these are the roles the library has.
Right.
They're not just to hold our stories. Present, past, and kind of frame the future, right? And then whose stories are you telling? Who is the power?
So cultural commons, then it's the word commons, because commons to me feels like it belongs with destination as place.
Yeah.
So I'm not objecting to the concept at all. I'm just suggesting that maybe this
Connector.
word does not capture what you intend.
Connector, cultural connector.
Yep. That's great feedback. And
Yeah, I think
others that-
commons as a
that
place
doesn't feel, that feels too much in place. It's a great. Social advocate, very simply, is social services. This is a place where you're connecting all people to resources and services, support their needs and well-being. You're a connector. All of these have changed names, but the idea there is we are here not to provide those basic services, but to connect folks to those basic services.
And be advocates in that conversation.
And advocate for them, so it's not just connecting the dots.
And this too is not a how in terms of how you express the growth catalyst opportunity.
No, this is the role of the library as understood, right? These are the, maybe we should call them, emerging roles of the library. And kind of help to frame some.
Yeah, and one way, we used this metaphor last week when this conversation came up, which Santa Monica, the city, at the beginning of the pandemic, the city administrator resigned, but he wrote this really beautiful resignation. You know, what I see is the future of cities. And it was, the 20th century, we built our systems, we built our infrastructure, and now the 21st century, we need to build our people. And I say that about the library. We've built a really great infrastructure of collections, of literacy, of skills and talents, of partnerships. So now the question is, what is that for? What is that for the quality of life improvement?
This becomes much clearer if you change that priorities word to roles, strategic roles, as an emerging framework. It just suddenly that resolves several things. And then let's just keep an open mind about whether cultural commons is the right wording for that.
It's not. And I think a lot of these, even I think there are others, we're also things like partner, we've seen the literacy, I think these will continue to evolve.
And outreach is a loaded term in our world, so we for better or worse, we probably find it in word for that.
I like that idea a lot. I think that is one of the things that we talked about. And I like the being a welcoming destination, being a place where people want to go physically, and a place that connects neighborhoods and amplifies the mayor's vision in that sense. But then to your point, the community outreach, whatever we want to call this, or the inputs, how do we push the library out?
Yeah.
How do we enhance the visibility of the library and its programs in places that do have a lot of traffic, whether it's the airport or the seaport, to use my earlier example. So I like that, or the MBTA or whatever, whatever else.
The word collaboration is missing.
And I think the outreach could be the how for all of the other things. It might not be
Right,
That thing, right, the rule.
the thing.
Yeah.
That's fair.
but the idea of collaboration is really looking at the city as a whole and collaborating with institutions that, you know, whether it's the historical society, the Athenaeum, the Museum of Science. There's ways for us to collaborate, Meet Boston, I mentioned earlier, across the city, where they are actually sharing our message. They're not doing the work, they're not being the library, but they're knowledgeable enough to begin to say, you know, here's our collection, go to the central library and see this.
If that were community collaborator,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would work.
of course.
should I be doing this or not? I'm sorry, we're breaking your process.
All of it's, no, but it's helpful to hear, you know, it's helpful for us to hear, what are the things that weren't clear? What are the things that Glare Out is missing? I think these are relevant things that will inform, it doesn't, you know, so not that we're gonna collectively sit here, so what do we think about this, to create, but that we can react to this and come back at something that starts to get a bit closer, something that resonates.
And we haven't commented on the other three, which means they must be 100% clear. I mean, I do think lifelong partner, welcoming destination and growth catalyst are pretty sharp.
Mhm.
I mean, one thing I want to go back to is when David opened up this work, we do three things. We do education, we do culture, and we do HSS. So in many ways, what this, I think, is really evolving is with that mandate, how do we describe what we want to do from our voice and our perspective? And it seems, I'm excited for this, for y'all to be able to answer that question as an organization, as this is evolving.
It's the framework, we also feel like it'll be most impactful if it's also a tool. So the next two slides start talking about preliminary thoughts still on how do you make this not only be a framework, but a tool. And its most basic stage, where you can start assessing current stage, right? Like we can have this in different ways, this can be services talking, how are we doing on each of these things? And really the interesting part here is not so much the colored zone, but the gray zone. As those are the gaps between where we want to be and where we are as a thing. So you can almost frame that this is the zones you should be really focused on. And this is obviously all data is merely illustrative here, there's no assessment of this, but to say, do we start even to visually start showing where the things that are strengths and where the gaps and how do we start? We then take this conversation further, and I think this is where we're gonna get into like some juicier territory and say, does this look different by branch? And sorry, this is so resolution problem there. We've worked in different places where sometimes we ask folks two questions, not only current state, but also which of these modalities would be most impactful to the communities you serve today? And as you deliver more services, that'll change. But we've asked, imagine if we did an all-staff survey, which we will, to ask them two questions. Which of these modalities would be the most impactful? And they're able to rank them. Only for the communities you serve. And this is specifically relevant to the branches, but I think it'll look a little different for other parts. And then how well do you feel that you are currently delivering on each of these modalities to the communities you serve? What emerges out of that is for each certain branch, the circle you're looking to fill looks a little bit different. It's almost like each branch gets its own fingerprint of impact. They're saying we would have the most impact at this branch by really focusing on community outreach. And that the social advocate piece is really not where we're going to be less transformational today. What is also exciting about this is, and then you do your current state and see those gaps. A year later, you reassess. And you're able to layer this year after year and see how are we and what are the things that have specifically worked and not worked across branches. I think that is like a little bit like a glimpse of the vision that we're starting to get excited about to say, it's more than a circle, it could have been a square, like how do you lay this out on a page and look good on a PDF? But how does it actually start supporting optional items and insights?
Prioritization.
And a prioritization that's a little bit different than perhaps, and maybe to the conversation we're having before, where we say, let's drop this one and choose this one, because that'll be hard to do given the multiple needs we're looking at. But maybe it starts being more about calibrating them by the different communities.
And communities is not just physical neighborhood branch communities, the digital community that we serve, the scholarly community
That's
that we
right.
serve, maybe even the users of the Christine Business Library as a defined bunch. There may be more than simply.
Thinking beyond branches.
I'll have an interesting matrix that I can see playing out around target audience and target place. And what I was saying about our experience with this kind of domain modality model is that when Richland Library did this approach, they really did hone in on a scarcity model. So where do we prioritize a modality in each neighborhood? Offer their strategy approach. When we did this work with New York Public Library, their end goal was that everything would be equal, but unique for each location. So you can use it in multiple ways, and that'll be something that you'll have. This tool, I think, is a great vehicle for that.
I'd love some reactions to just where this is headed in terms of applicability, use, just like, it's easy for us to get excited about it and style, but get your sense of, to the approach.
I love the approach. For us to use it as a tool to see.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I really like the approach for us to use it as a tool to see where we are and where we can, and then we'll talk a lot about using data more, right? Using metrics. So this puts us in that direction.
Yeah, so the themes that I'm hearing are, first of all, I would say good work. This is a really rich discussion. I think it's helpful. But some of the themes that I'm hearing are there's just so much here, and if we're not prioritizing in the right way, this exercise becomes not particularly meaningful. So I think that is yet to come, but that's clearly heard, and that's going to be critical. And then there's also the distinction between the central library and also the other branch libraries, and let's make sure to have the vision be organic and emerge from the branches, but we also have to provide some sort of vision as part of this exercise. So I guess one lens that I think about in terms of prioritization is what can the library do that other institutions can't do? I think that would be an interesting question to ask. And to me, some things that we are that others aren't would include the physical space. These are some of the most beautiful welcoming spaces in the city, and they're a way of knitting together communities in a way that is core to the mayor's philosophy. So that seems really important to me. There are probably other things like that the library does that other institutions can't do, but I would suggest that's one lens of thinking about prioritization.
Clarifying question to you, when you say, if we don't get the priorities right, we don't prioritize this, it'll be for naught. Is that the same thing as saying, if we don't get these 6 categories or however many they end up being right? Is that what you mean by setting the right categories and what we're looking for goals to be? Or is it something else?
I think setting the right categories is a predicate, but then if you've got various categories and you think they're all good ideas, it's kind of meaningless at the end of the day, right?
That's the part that I think there's a tension. That's how I started this project. I started saying, we're gonna find out what the library's not gonna do. Personally, I walked in like, we're gonna try to do everything, we're gonna cut some things off. As I've come to be involved in this project and hearing all these voices and hearing from many of you, my perspective individually has shifted a little bit to say, is it more around different segments we're looking to serve, like start to prioritize, but that as a whole, we are committed to the whole circle. And I think that's a debate, we can go either way, and I think, but I'm feeling that there's different opinions.
This model will turn ultimately on a knife's edge between those two extremes. If you have cracked the secret sauce here, then we've got the right 4 or 8 categories, 6 categories, right, or roles, but allowed for the individual segments, whether those be branches or other communities, to actively prioritize in a way that does make hard choices. So that's the challenge and possibly the beauty of this model, as long as it works. But I do think this is a knife edge of we either, reduce priorities, so something important gets left out, or it's still in all things to all people and you choose your own adventure. So the extremes on both ends of this are still frightening. But there is a beauty about this that may actually be the right answer for our environment. I do think the prioritization exercise of next, so that we understand, well, if it's community outreach, is it we need 5 more Jennifers and we need to double Lisa's marketing budget because it's really about engagement? Or is it, when it comes to lifelong partner and learning, we need to up our game around circulating? I mean, I don't know what those hard choices are next, the actual initiatives. So I don't want to get ahead of your process because I keep doing that, but ultimately testing this out with initiatives will be the way to see if it's a good model.
And
Okay, there are 2 things. That does allow for that. This is what the library's priorities are, but this is how we get there varies because of each unique community, each unique branch, each unique department, whatever, can then say, this is where we need to do more work. And I kind of flip it from what does the library do that no one else does to what do the people we serve need? What are like for me, when I'm thinking about services, what the library is providing, it's like, so what does the community need? Is that something we can provide or are providing? There's some things we don't provide, or we can't provide, and that's when we say, oh, you need to come here for that service. But like that's some things like the nutritional literacy or the workforce development even, or the ESOL, that's what we were seeing was a need. That was a place where we actually could provide, and it might be something that Rosendale can focus on, but East Boston else. And I think having that flexibility makes this model really appealing.
I think that, the whole discussion is the devil's in the details, right? So, we've got rules here, but I think we also need to keep in mind that below this victory level, these are strategies, there are tactics below that underpin all of this. And I think that's where the prioritization act really comes to light. In addition, I think that having clearly articulated goals for the library will help with deciding what the tactics are. Like, does this program fit into these categories? If no, then we set it aside for the moment. So I sort of think the real work comes one level below this.
there are a couple of things I just want to comment on that I'm hearing that I'm excited about for you all. One of the questions about, is this too much? Contextually, this organization doesn't even know what its mission is right now. Like literally, where do we go to fund our mission? So there's a context here that I hope is lending some clarity. I would be interested from the staff if they saw these 6 priorities emerging as offering some of that clarity right now from the context of the organization. The questions on what do we do well, what does our community need, and then also how we do our work is also a really interesting question, because we do our work with compassion in ways that other folks don't do. So I think those are great thought starters.
Again, for me, the way to measure this, how would we know this is working? The way that we would know that this is working is that these roles, you go into, let's say I go into the Alston branch, and I know it's connected to Harvard, and I know they have the American Repertory Theater in the new building. And what I would be looking for is that vitality, that vibrancy. So in the language that we're using, when we think about what happens in a third place, what happens is an experience and a connection. People feel that, there's a way that people feel connected to that particular library, and their identity is forged in that. And that's why the friends groups grow. That's why the collaborations with businesses grow, things like that happen, they just kind of spring up. Does that? I think that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, community collaborations, they have happen organically, and I think things are the strongest and have the most impact for the community when when you're growing together and doing, when you're doing programming or something together in your region. But also it's nice to have the overarching goals of the library, so that you're all part of the same system of shared goals.
I think, as I said, the way to do it is to try it. Right now, it's a QR code right in front of you. If you don't have a QR code, we have a computer, if it's easier, but does anybody want a computer? We're gonna ask you to prioritize these. We're not gonna hold you to them. This is just an exercise.
It's
We're gonna
good.
change the categories,
Good.
but we're gonna ask you to say, we're gonna ask you the same questions, how impactful each of these are.
It is on the placement in front of you. The QR code is a little far from your table. It's just on the left-hand corner.
I think
Yeah.
their roles, I guess.
Yeah. And we're gonna ask two questions. So we're trying an experiment. If the tech fails on it, the tech fails on it. But basically, we want to ask this group, and if you need help with the tech, we also have a laptop as well we can lend for the voting. Holly, if you've got yours ready. It's mainly question one is, again, pending wordsmithing of the 6 categories that we have been speaking to. Scale of 1 to 5 future impact. Which do you think are the most impactful, least impactful? Again, this is.
Roles instead of priorities.
Yes, less.
Thank you, yes.
Yes. And then we will switch to a second question, which is where do we feel we are now? So the main thing that we're asking, again, it'll take us a minute to get in and then the poll will update live based on the averages. If you're having any issues, we have 3 or 4 laptops and a couple extra phones we can lend you to make sure that this is inclusive of all votes. But let's give it a minute just to see where it lands. And again, Holly and myself are on tap with a couple extra
I'm
phones.
impressed with it.
It takes,
Looks like one critique.
it's impressive, but it does take a minute to get in.
One critique would be that we should all probably have a fixed number of points to allocate.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yes.
Yeah,
We
and when-
considered doing it with stickers, but we thought this might be a little bit, slightly a little bit different.
That's right, because right now, what do we do? We do these exercises, distribute them.
Sorry.
But that says something.
Yeah, it's our
Side
fault.
priorities.
This one, we wanted to say, like, do all these things then.
Trying not to, but it still says something.
It does, yeah.
As someone who loves gamification, I'm like, there's so many questions.
Yes,
But I guess my question is, this is what we think
just your personal opinion.
the priorities.
Correct.
I know.
Well, the-
we know.
No, but for the future, how impactful we think we would be.
Just, there are a couple people talking at the same time. To your comment, Joe, it's which, in your personal opinion, do you think are the most impactful or least impactful? You can also skip some of them. So
You
you
could also choose to give them all the same priority.
could as well, but that's why we're doing it in average.
That would be.
You could also pull up another phone and.
It would be an endorsement of the frameworks, right? If
Right.
it's all
Yeah, you
kind of the
pick them all,
same,
right.
we're like, we got the right ones, and nothing's coming out.
Yeah. So just, anyone else having any tech issues, just put your hand up. Holly will come visit you. But as you can see, the graph is live and we're seeing a little bit of coalescence around that aspect of the lifelong learning partner as being kind of universally very impactful, the welcoming destination, and then a little bit more sort of debate around the cultural common social advocate, but nothing is showing up as a 0, which we knew was impossible, but it could have happened. And we'll just give it a minute to settle in. Before we switch to the next comment, though, any thoughts around the voting, or is it to the question of, is there any we should drop? I think if it's a role, it's something we can prioritize within, but any initial thoughts around what you voted before we switch to evaluating the current state? Because we want to be able to.
Possible that some lower priority thing is not less important, but it's simply something that the impact might be more
less
difficult to achieve over a short period of time.
Or we're not as confident about that in our role and purpose for the future.
And for our team, taking that away, it's like, how do we make all of these impactful as well?
It is really interesting, this idea of culture and the special collections. To me, it's interesting that it came out as the least
Barely.
impactful. You know, in a way, not statistically relevant, like not like, whoa, it's off the charts, but I think it's an it's better.
Somebody adjusted.
And as a preview, we are going into our next round of engagements to have these conversations about what do these mean for us? How do we get down to that double click down? And we are hoping to use this evolving framework to support that conversation. So instead of just asking what could we be full blue sky, it's within these 6, what should we do?
I think there's also a distinction that we haven't really touched on between what we do and what we communicate.
Yeah.
I think a communication strategy that says we do 1,000 things,
Mhm.
that's a list of them.
Yeah.
It's to state the obvious, going to be not effective.
That's
not. So
Mhm.
to communicate well, we really have to settle on, one thing that we really want to convey
Focus on.
to get through the door.
That's right.
And I think for this strategy to be a success, we have to be able to make it a very simple way why the library matters, and to say we do 10 things or 20 things is not gonna.
Even 6 things, yeah. I hear you.
6 is.
Yeah.
Right.
Even 6 is difficult, I think, to that point,
Yeah.
yes.
Great.
Okay,
Before we go on, this doesn't mean we're eliminating it. It just
No.
means
It's just,
I
we're
want to
just setting up a pulse. Yeah.
At
let's,
this moment, at whatever hour this is on this 10th day of May.
Yes.
This particular group is stating that these are the priorities of our roles. But by numbers, it doesn't eliminate cultural comments.
At all.
So that,
and even if it had, we wouldn't eliminate it based on this process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
And
This is pretty unsafe.
Yeah. And then the other piece, going back to the original conversation of asking priority or what was included. This is without knowing what are the things you can put into this mix, right?
That's right. But as you there's.
Yeah, I would say to the question around what was left on the cutting room floor, I think we found that these 6 potential rules are very inclusive of the majority of what we have heard. I think there's a spare comment to decide about whether the library should include animals, for example, or whether we actually 2 post notes around animals, but that sort of thing. I would say it's individual comments that have fallen off, but the overarching trends and themes from all of our sessions have been bubbling up to these 6. I shouldn't have mentioned the animals.
Want to know what's on the cutting room floor?
Ask me afterwards about the cutting, but I would say the themes we are finding tend to be very inclusive of everything that we've heard. And there isn't necessarily one that emerges as sort of the weakest one at this point. Sorry, what was your?
Okay, so just to ground the animal comment, you're saying you had a conversation, so I get a welcoming destination.
You shouldn't have to.
If you go to the whole right over here, they have the little dog, the lab dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can.
read the
Some of the
dogs,
libraries across the country.
That's right,
have
yeah.
And
Those comfort animals during story time or during the elder piece. Is that?
yeah, I think that's a great example.
That would be under welcoming destination.
Telling me I did this.
Yeah, but that wasn't the conversation, sorry, there was a conversation like having cats in libraries.
Or owls or other animals, but
We have to rail ourselves.
Yeah.
okay.
I do think to Priscilla's point.
I'm sorry.
There is a why embedded.
Mhm.
And, I want to kind of frame this as there are choices that aren't here that represent how do we foster upward mobility, equitable transportation, housing. These are choices that are made that we are not in that focus. But to your point about this framework enabling a flexibility around innovations, if we are committed to being a lifelong partner and social advocacy, the role of reading to a dog has shown that there are benefits for increased literacy because of that aspect. And emotional and support animals, you're seeing in libraries.
The Fields Corner Branch did that fairly recently.
Yes.
So it gives folks a framework of how to fit in that into a larger role and purpose that prioritizes that decision making.
Nor are we giving up on our nascent partnership with the Animal Rescue League of Boston and bringing, economic support and equity to families that include pets in three neighborhoods that we did that program. The example was pest control, really, that we doesn't rise to the priority.
I think you're in the room with that one as well, or whether owls should be within the library. Ask me later about what else we've cut, but it's a very slim percentage of the comments we've received. If you still have your browser open from the last question, it should have switched to the new one, which is current state. And again, this is a moment in time, it is unscientific, but we wanted something quote unquote measurable that we could sort of toggle between with this group as far as what is that gap between where our future impact could be and where we are now. Again, we know this is just a moment in time, but we are hoping to ask similar questions and affecting engagements to a wider swath. So
this is so interesting because in terms of an anecdotal, what we're hearing, this feels
different
instinctively. No, it feels about right. Far with what we're hearing.
So we'll leave a minute for people to vote. But in general, it's sort of the initial pattern, and I'm sure it'll change as I'm talking, that's common when we use this tool, is that some of our current strengths are that place that you place within the city. Being that lifelong learning partner, bracket books, literacy, those pieces, and that sort of cultural commons as a differentiator and a strength. The average is coming down a little bit. And maybe areas to grow around connecting more in depth to our communities. And that sort of social and growth catalyst as far as like, what are the emerging areas that we're reaching into?
It's interesting because everything above the x-axis are the more, I don't know how to use this word, but like the more traditional goals of the library, or collections, or learning, or a place, right? And the ones below are more, perhaps not what people might usually traditionally think of a library, like outreach and personal fulfillment and services. So that's an interesting story there. So,
and glancing at the time, we have approximately 4 minutes remaining. Your votes will, if you haven't hit submit yet, your votes will still count. We'll put the final image in the follow-ups. I just have 2 last pieces. One is, we'll share out the latest roadmap, but I think the piece that is of more interest is what are our upcoming engagements? What's the next swap? The all-staff survey is one of them. As Patricia mentioned, we're trying to get some data from a wide audience. Apologies, Paula, I'm just trying to wrap up. The connecting with the mayor, we'll be reaching out to do a conversation with the mayor and probably a couple other stakeholders, similar to our conversations with the associates and the other groups, sort of how do you connect with the library? How is that working? How could that work? And then we also do want to use this framework to support the conversation and layer on more and more information onto that piece. On May 21st, we have a 15-minute update to the wider board, more to come on that. And then engaging with strategic partners, David and team put together a comprehensive list, and our team will be coming back with some suggestions on ways to engage those groups.
So can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Personal privilege. So I'm the co-chair of the Special Collections Committee.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a meeting in June. When is that meeting? It's not in June. June 5th. And the agenda for that meeting is really focused on the strategic plan and how special collections fits within that. I think Jose and Christian both said you guys could attend that.
Yes.
I think we should maybe do some thinking about, and I don't know whether you guys are available or give us material.
I know it's on the website, but you said June.
Pamela, I think it would be helpful if we had some input from you guys. Just to sort of, it's just an hour and a half meeting, I think, and or not even 75 minutes, not the entire agenda, but I think it would be good to have some, context for the discussion, because that'll be specifically how the special collections fits within.
That's fantastic.
It's actually June 14th.
June 14th.
8:30.
Yeah.
Right here, 8:30.
Yeah, we're excited to come back to you, when we come back to you in July, to say, you go back to, sorry, just for a second, that and share like, how did the various regions respond? It's the same, kind of the same exercise, evolved version of the same exercise we just did. Sorry, if you could go to the. What did staff say? how did that vary page by page? You put everybody together, where did that, what are some of those things that matter most, that they felt they could serve as or variation of that, and really using this framework so that we're evolving our conversations. I think, to Dr. Luce's point, like to start to converge more and more and help start to say, what if we are to prioritize? Who makes those decisions and how can we bring voices in and then come back to this leadership about some of those conversations around practice?
I do, to my earlier question, think maybe this is where Lisa and Sarah will be able to help, who know the organization internally, is how we group specific departments could be important to that analysis. Once you get out of branches, there are, how do people show up?
How you segment those folks, that's a great point.
To your point, sort of digital, Kirsten, other partners, and we can follow up on that list for that. Sorry, we ran all the way up to the edge of time.
Not surprisingly.
No, this is I thought this was a really good meeting. Thank you for all the.
Thank you all.
Went into
Appreciate it.
Framing these issues and
Okay.
it does seem like we're making progress. So, is there a motion to adjourn?
Hold on, but there is, that the new business was that we.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any business? Thank you. Thank you. I'm moving the words.
You're literally moving to adjourn.
I hear a consensus on adjournment. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yes.
Need to dust off the. Very good to see you.
Thank you. No, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go back.
Far too much dance. Yes.
Sit down, big, level,